I've really been doing the inner work. If you've been around the self-help or the personal development space, you've probably heard people say some version of that phrase. And unfortunately, inner work is one of those terms that is just getting used so much lately that it's kind of hard to know what it actually means. And honestly, that kind of stinks because inner work is some of the most transformative work that you can do in your life. There's a reason why this company is called Inner Workout. So we're gonna use this video to talk about what inner work is from the inner workout perspective. Let's start with a definition. Inner work is the work you do to become more of who you already are. Really sit with that for a second. You don't need to become more like that author. You don't need to become more like me or your sister or the person that you see on social media. When you are doing inner work the way that we talk about, you are becoming a truer version of yourself. And the definition that we use for inner work really goes nicely with this quote from Carl Jung. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That's what you're getting to through inner work. When it's done correctly, inner work helps you become a truer, fuller expression of yourself instead of like an off-brand dupe of someone else. So that's what inner work is. Let's talk about how you do inner work and what that journey looks like. At Inner Workout, we talk about 4 aspects of inner work: self-care and support, unlearning, learning, and growth. I'm gonna walk you through each of those aspects and give you some ideas about how you can do inner work in that area. But before I do that, I just wanna be really clear that inner work is not a one and done experience. It's not like you journal once and then you check it off your list, you're all done with inner work. No, this is a journey. And the way that you do inner work and what unfolds for you as you do that work is going to look different than it does for the person next to you, is going to look different than it does for me, is going to look different than it does for them. It's a really personal journey. So let's start with self-care and support. So many people want to skip over this part of inner work because it feels like a nice to have. It feels like I just want to get to the work part of it. Why would I pause and make sure that I've got my self-care and support in check first? But the reality is that self-care and support are foundational to your inner work. Think about it. As you are becoming more of who you truly are, there's going to be parts of it that are uncomfortable. There are going to be parts that stretch you. You're gonna have to face parts of yourself that you probably would rather ignore. And if you haven't laid that foundation of self-care and support, it is going to be hard for you to keep going in your inner work. Inner work is deep work. And so we really want to lay that foundation of self-care and support so that you don't burn out before you get to the best part. So here are some ideas that you might try. You can take our free Take Care assessment to get really clear on where you can focus your self-care. You can start building regular practices, whether that's daily or weekly or monthly practices to replenish yourself. You might plan a DIY self-care retreat. One of the most impactful, yet also simplest things that you can do is just pace yourself. Inner work is not a race, and when you go at a pace that's sustainable, you make sure that you can be in this work for the long haul. Let's move into unlearning. Most of the time, people think that when they're doing their inner work, they're starting from a blank page. That's actually not the case. When you're doing your inner work, it's more like you are writing on a page that looks blank, but it's actually filled with invisible ink. And that invisible ink is made up of past experiences, biases, beliefs, behaviors. And even though we can't always see it, all of those things color the way that we approach our inner work, the way that we see ourselves, the way that we treat ourselves and others, and what we're able to envision is possible for us. It's really hard to make meaningful progress when you skip out on unlearning. You get stuck in the same patterns, you keep having the same beliefs on repeat, and even though you intellectually know that something isn't working for you, you find yourself repeating those same behaviors. So what unlearning does is it allows you to address your invisible ink So then you're actually able to start from more of a blank page. Here are a few starting points for unlearning. You can notice recurring themes in your life. Ask questions like, what are the thoughts that keep popping up for me? Or what are the obstacles I keep running into every time I try to start fresh? Once you've noticed those themes, you can start to name them by giving them a name like the I'll never succeed story, or the I have to do everything myself story. You put a little bit of distance between yourself and the theme or story. This comes from acceptance and commitment therapy. They call this process cognitive diffusion. And then the last thing that you can do is call in backup. Sometimes we are just so close to our biases, beliefs, and behaviors that we can't see them, let alone imagine how to get around them. That's when you can bring on someone like a therapist or a coach or a trusted friend to support you in the process of unlearning. Now let's move into learning. And we are a good bit into this video and we're just now starting to talk about learning, which is interesting because that's where most people like to start the process. But as you're hopefully starting to see now, your learning is going to be so much more effective when you've already laid that foundation of self-care and support, and you've already done the work of unlearning. And from our perspective, there's two forms that learning takes in your inner work. The first is learning about yourself, and then the second is learning skills and tools to support your inner work. Let's start with learning about yourself. We keep going back to this idea of inner work as the work you do to become more of who you already are, and you can't do that if you don't know who you are. And as simple as this piece sounds, it's actually pretty difficult for people who identify as self-help junkies because you know what you quote unquote should be doing, but it's hard to step into your self-expertise. Here's a reminder for you. You are your own best expert. And what you need to do as you're learning about yourself is to filter through all of that knowledge, to understand what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and how that fits into your current circumstances, your values, and your goals. To quote many wise teachers, take what serves you and leave the rest. Really, it is okay for you to not do something exactly the way you've been taught or exactly as this person online does it or as it was mapped out in this book. When you find what works for you, you're learning about yourself, you're stepping into your self-expertise, and that's really potent inner work. So here are some tools that you can do to build that self-knowledge and self-expertise. You might use personality frameworks, whether that is the Enneagram or Myers-Briggs or human design or astrology. They can get you into conversation about who you are. That's important, the way that I phrased it. Get you into conversation. Remember, you're the ultimate expert. So if you find these frameworks to be limiting, maybe that's something you need to step away from for now, maybe forever. But when you view them as like this conversation starter, it can help you understand yourself and maybe give you some terminology. So sometimes that resonates with people, sometimes it doesn't. This is an opportunity to use your self-expertise to see if playing with personality frameworks would be useful for you. Another tool is coaching. So the best coaches, and I'm talking about people who are trained and practice in coaching as a skill, not just people who decided last night to call themselves a coach. These highly skilled coaches will always point you back to yourself. That's really the sign of a skilled coach. They're not just trying to force you into their framework or what worked for them, but they're helping you more deeply understand your needs and yourself in the moment. And the last thing is working with cards. A lot of times people think that tarot cards or oracle cards are about trying to see the future and that they are somehow in control of you. My favorite way to work with them is to think of them as like these really beautiful reflection prompts. You can pull a card and view it as a conversation starter. See what you can learn about yourself through the cards. Now let's move to this second side of learning. Learning skills and tools to support your inner work. Once you're clear on where you're at, what makes you tick, and what you want, you're ready to do some more targeted learning. You might want to develop a new movement practice to support your physical well-being. Or maybe you know that long-term you want to make a career shift and there are some skill gaps that you need to fill. And I've got some good and bad news for you. You have both the blessing and the curse of living in an age of infinite content. Like on Amazon alone, you have access to 32 million books. There are nearly 3 million podcasts that you could be listening to and 800 million YouTube videos. Not to mention the apps, courses, and programs that are all available for sale. So what I want to do is give you some questions you can use to figure out where you'd like to learn from. First question, why do I want to learn this content? Is this coming from a place of me trying to become more me, or am I trying to become more like someone else? Do the teacher's values align with mine? How did the teacher acquire their knowledge? This is a really important question because we have a lot of people on the internet who are teaching things that just worked for them, or teaching things that maybe they asked ChatGPT about or watched one video and now are saying they're an expert. So if you really want to go deep in a topic, it's probably important to make sure that this person has lived experience and they're upfront that it is their experience and maybe not everything will apply, or that they have some training or some practice or have learned from other teachers that you admire in this space. The next question, how is this teacher's experience similar or different to mine? What adjustments might I have to make? So if someone is doing something and it's all about becoming an entrepreneur, and they have a partner who has health insurance and they don't have to worry about that cost, that doesn't mean that the rest of their content is bad, but you do know, okay, there are some adjustments that I might have to make based on that. Or if someone's talking about their experience and they have kids or they don't have kids, or they live in a different part of the country, or they live in a different country, or they're 10 years older than you or 10 years younger than you. Again, none of these are disqualifying, but it's nice to name up front, okay, here's where we overlap. We have really aligned values, really similar goals, and somewhat similar experience, but we're different in these ways, and I know I'm gonna have to make adjustments. That's fine. And the last question, definitely not least, is what is my plan for applying this knowledge? If you've been around the inner workout universe, you probably heard me talk about how knowledge is only really valuable once it's applied. And so, yeah, it's great to learn things. I love learning things. And also, that knowledge just kind of sits in the back of your brain unless you do something with it. So whether it's I want to host a dinner party and talk about this with my friends, or I want to apply this to making a piece of art, or I'm going to put this on my resume, whatever it might be, but make sure that you have a plan for how you want to apply this knowledge. And it doesn't have to be something super big or public. It could be, I'm going to apply this to my journaling practice now. Or I've always wanted to write a book just for me, and this is gonna help me write the outline, even if I don't show it to anyone, as long as you know what you're gonna do with this knowledge. Now we get to the final aspect of our inner work journey, which is growth. And as with all cycles, this ending is really just a new beginning. The growth stage is where you put your self-care and support, your unlearning and your learning into practice in your daily life. And it's totally normal that as you're in this growth phase, that you end up revisiting other parts of your journey. So for example, maybe you're at this point where you're starting to develop new relationships, and then there's an old belief that keeps popping back up, and you've got to revisit your unlearning. Or maybe you've mentally set boundaries, but then you realize, oh wait, I don't know how to have those boundary setting conversations. So then you go back to learning. Don't get discouraged. This is all part of your inner work. Here's some of what you can expect as you're in the growth phase. The first thing is imperfect, aligned action. Both of those words are important. So imperfect. There's really no room for perfectionism in your inner work. You gotta roll up your sleeves and start doing things as long as it feels aligned to your values, to your goals, to who you know yourself to be. It's okay for it to be messy and feel awkward and slower than you'd like it to be, as long as you're headed in what you define as the right direction. The other thing that you can expect is experimentation. As I love to say, you can't fail an experiment, you can only learn. So try and approach your inner work like an experiment. You might even use language like, I'm experimenting with my evening routine. I'm trying out waking up earlier to see how it feels. It might also be helpful for you to put a time frame on your experiment. So it's something that you're trying for a week or a month or a quarter. And then once that time is up, you can ask yourself some questions like these ones. What worked? What didn't work? What did I learn? Do I want to hold on to this practice? And if so, what do I need to shift to make it even more supportive? You're always changing and your environment is always changing too. And when you approach your inner work as an experiment, you're really creating the conditions for you to adapt and making it feel really natural instead of something where you failed because you have to try something different. No, you're just baking it in. And then the last thing that I want you to expect and to build in for yourself in the growth phase is celebration. This is important because if you can't acknowledge your growth, you will never experience the full benefits of growing. You'll still feel behind, you'll still feel trapped in comparison, and you'll still feel like you have to grow just a little bit more in order to finally be worthy. At Inner Workout, we don't use a really complex tool to see your growth as it's happening. All we do is we pause and we celebrate. Celebration is really such an underutilized tool for sustaining your growth. When you allow yourself to celebrate the progress that you've made thus far, it feels worth it to keep taking small steps forward. But what I see too often is that we reserve celebration for some goal far off in the distance. And then when we start to get to that goal, I often see people then shift the goalpost even further without taking that moment to celebrate. So if you really want your inner work to be something that's sustainable, celebrate early and often. Celebrate the tiniest things. It all counts. It's all worthy of celebrating because you're worthy of celebrating. So there you have it. That's the inner workout overview for how we view inner work. We define it as the work you do to become more of who you already are. And we see it having these 4 aspects, these 4 phases of self-care and support, unlearning, learning, and growth. Know that we're here for you and we're rooting for you as you go through your inner work journey. You can like and subscribe to this channel to get more resources, and also make sure that you're subscribed to our newsletter. That's how you'll know about all the other things that we have going on in the Inner Workout universe to support you in your self-care and inner work. Take care.